Hey, welcome to the Contrary, a weekly discussion of news and social issues from diverse perspectives. Up first, incredible early voting and mail-in ballots. What is that going to do about the call of the election next Tuesday?
We even have mobile units going out to hard to get places so that people will have more accessibility. And I do think, at least what I've been seeing anecdotally, is that more women are really taking this very seriously and are actually helping to engage and kind of energize, I think, our families, our communities, and our neighborhoods. And part of it comes out of the whole Women's March movement that started, almost 3 years ago, as soon as this president took office. And more women got elected, more women started to take ownership, and they brought their children and their families and their spouses together on that one, playing field. And I see it playing out now across the country. And at least in circles that I'm familiar with, women are supporting other women also to run for office. And that, to me, is very exciting as well.
We also reached out to the Trump campaign for a spokesperson, but we were declined due to scheduling reasons. Joining me this week are DC Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton of the District of Columbia, Carrie Lukas of the Independent Women's Forum, Hilary Rosen, Democratic strategist, and Rina Shah, head of Republican Women for Biden. Starting with you, Eleanor, there has been incredible early voting just before this past week. There were almost 70 million more than 60 million mail-in ballots and early voters. I myself voted early in Virginia. How are poll analysts and poll takers recording this, and what does it mean for the election on Tuesday the 3rd?
Well, I think this early voting increases enthusiasm for the Democratic ticket all the way up and down the ballot, beginning with Trump and going all the way to the Senate and the House. We're even going to increase in the House. Now, the early voting takes place in a number of different ways. I've early voted, and there's a box here in the District of Columbia that you can just put it in. But Trump is forcing, by his rhetoric, many of his people to vote on election day. So we can't put our cards on the table yet, but that's going to make it very difficult for him because he's cast such aspersion on mail-in voting.
All right, but Carrie Lukas, I've actually seen a Pew poll from a year or so ago saying that, first of all, exit polling is very unreliable because people are, they can't get a fix on how many from each party, from each demographic they're interviewing. So they really don't know from exit polls, which is what we rely on, how the voting really was last election. And because of President Trump saying don't vote by mail, what do you think all that is going to, what effect that's going to have on the election?
Yeah, I think this is one of those years where, more than ever, it's important to be real humble about what we know and what we don't know. There's so much, you get so much information. You can find something to support almost anything out there in terms of whatever your preferences and whatever you're hoping. You can find evidence to back it up. There's a lot of polls that look very like a slam dunk for Biden. But I remember that that 4 years ago, it sure looked that way for Hillary Clinton. And so we just don't know. I think that the real question on early voting is not, I think that the problem is going to be, or the question is going to be, how this almost functions as administratively. Obviously there is legitimate concerns about votes being lost or misplaced, or how it's going to be counted, how they're going to be reconciled, and that's not, that's not a. I feel like a lot of times, anytime you say anything about the bad about the potential of voting remotely, that it comes across as if you're a wild conspiracy theorist. But we all know the United States has a lot of monitoring of elections around the world. And we're very suspicious when you have voting that goes on for months, and if it's putting it in a box that can then be tampered with, there's a lot of potential problems. So I worry about how the outcome is going to be, or what kind of questions there's going to be left at the end. So I think no matter how this goes, one way or the other, we should hope for a clear-cut winner rather than having this become a big knockdown, drag out in the courts. I think that would be really hard on the country.
Rina, I've spoken with GOTV, Get Out the Vote, people around the country, and both parties are much more focused on getting out the vote. The Republicans usually don't have to focus that much because their white, non-college educated demographic, for some reason, tends to vote more reliably than the Democratic demographic does. And pollsters this year supposedly have taken that into account because of the horrendously wrong predictions they made in 2016. Your thoughts?
Well, certainly the pollsters I've spoken to on both sides of the aisle are saying so much has changed about polling since 2016. I'm a frequent visitor of the 538 website, and then wake up every morning and tune in there, and they have some excellent analysis as well as some infographics for those who are interested to really tell what is different this year and why perhaps despite the pandemic and all of the chaos it's caused in voting, that pollsters do generally have different methods and have a different sense this year. Also, let's not make a small thing of the fact that Biden is really polling so much differently than Hillary Clinton did, and he's well outside the margin of error in many states. And this is not something that people were expecting at this point in the game, but it's come up and it's been a steady lead. He's grown that lead, and I think that really says something about this campaign. And what it tells us mostly is that this is going to be a close race. Based on the polling I've seen of the past few days, it is going to be a close race. But I'm going to most agree with Carrie there. We need a really definitive victory for one candidate or the other on election night, because we know that the further this goes along, as it gets prolonged, the higher chance it is for both sides to really do something frankly nefarious, or something that makes the minds of American voters feel that there's something nefarious happening.
Hillary, are Democrats worried that with all the so-called voter suppression they're claiming is going on, with telling people not to vote, getting calls saying they'll check your felony record if you tell them who you are and give them your personal information? Do Democrats fear that's going to hurt Democrats more than Republicans?
Look, I think it's consistently clear and factual that it is Republicans trying to prevent people from voting and not Democrats in this election. That's just indisputable. And, I think it's important just to separate for viewers the kinds of early voting we're talking about. There's early voting in person, where you're actually going in districts to voting machines and your votes get counted right away and will be part of the tally. And then there's vote by mail, which has become more problematic because these states are so under-resourced right now. And that's the vote that the Republicans keep going to court to try and prevent from being counted, even though Donald Trump has consistently pulled resources away from the post office for the last year and a half anticipating this. And mail delivery is taking longer and longer in many states across the country. So way longer states, when you look at it, are critical. Pennsylvania is the key one, where the Trump administration saying, no, we're going to court. You cannot count all of the ballots. And so I think we have to be very vigilant on election night on whether or not the mail-in ballots are being counted in these key states. And if they're not being counted, Democrats are going to have to fight for those to be counted, because when they are, I'm confident Joe Biden wins. But this, constant game that Republicans have played is so familiar to 2000 about, if you say bad things enough, you put it in the vernacular. And we're having this conversation about voting. We're not having a conversation about the issues and about the candidates. And that's what's taken over the country this week.
If I can just jump in, because I think that this is such an absolute smearing of Republicans. The idea that it's somehow just a Republican plot to say that I'm a little worried about the Republicans about the post office. I mean, when you put something in the mail that you actually care about, that is important, most people do not trust the post office because it has a tremendous fault rate. You've already found ballots that have been thrown away, military ballots, and some Trump ballots that were thrown into the trash. So this isn't just, it's just fairly galling. And I know I'm on a panel with 4 Biden supporters against me, so I'm an unpopular person on this panel. But I think it's just very ridiculous to say that it's one-sided, that all the problems are just Republicans.
Carrie, wait a minute. I'm not a Biden supporter. I'm officially neutral.
Okay,
Sorry.
Okay, so
But
here's
anyway, go ahead.
But Trump supporters consistently talk about this as a smear campaign. It's just factual that it's Republicans trying to stop voting. And there's just it's not even worth having this conversation for much longer about this.
I want to switch now to women voters and women candidates. Eleanor, I read an interview with the head of the women's study group at Rutgers, and they are saying that more women of color are running for congressional office than there are women in the U.S. House. Now, my question is, are most of those women running for so-called junk seats, did they get those kind of nominations, or did they get nominations where they really, for the majority, where they can really win?
Bonnie, more women are running from each party. And yes, Republican women have awakened because their numbers have dwindled to very few in the House of Representatives, and they have awakened to the fact that they should vote. But Democratic women are voting to expand the numbers that we won in 2018 when we took over the House, so that I expect that the boon in women voting will benefit Democrats more than Republicans, because the seats that are out there to be taken over are Republican seats, and those are seats in which Democratic women are doing well and are going to help us expand the House.
Do you think there will be but it's a huge margin. There are 147 women in the U.S. House. I don't know how many of them are of color, but I would imagine a substantial amount. And there's something like 180 something women of color running for Congress. How many of them are going to make it? How many got the nomination in the way that the district tilts politically?
That's an extraordinary number of women of color to be running for Congress. And I think that part of that has to do with Trump. Part of it has to do with the success that Democrats had in taking over the House in 2018, encouraging women to step up. The numbers tell us that women feel invigorated in part by the changes they've seen in the country under Trump, and Democratic women think that that means it's time for them to step forward.
Do Republican women want to take back the Republican Party as they had it up until about the late 80s as a party of at least mixed opinion on women's rights like abortion?
Well, first we should acknowledge the facts here, and this year started out really well. A record-breaking 227 Republican women filed to run for the House of Reps this cycle, and that the previous record was, I think, 133 in 2010. And so the Center for American Women in Politics, they keep some really good numbers. I encourage folks to go check them out there. But really, this is no small thing. This is actually very much progress for the Republican Party, and it should be attributed to Congress Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York. She made some great efforts turning her leadership political action committee into something she called EPAC, which was really for women, to help women get out of primaries. That was the number one problem we saw with Republican women, and we've talked about on this show many, many times. Now nearly 100 of those women that filed won their primaries, Republican primaries, and they've become their party's nominee. So that doubled the previous record of female Republican candidates in a general election. This is really big for the party. I do think a lot of those have been energized by President Trump, the feeling that, you know, he really stands with them in their community, and also feeling that he's an outsider politically, and that if he could run and win, and they could too. So I'd heard that in these past few years. What I'm hearing now this year in my conversations with Republican women who are switching their vote from Trump in 2016 to Biden this year is that they are really concerned about the direction of the country for two reasons. Economy, because of the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, I was not having these conversations, so I don't have any data to share there. But largely in rural communities, like my home state of West Virginia, where I've convened some salon conversations, I hear it over and over, is that it is the economy to them. It is a feeling that what is going to happen nationally and how is this country going to recover from the hit that we've taken from the pandemic. Mind you, there are a lot of people right now out there with zero in their bank account, and the Senate just left and did nothing for the American people. I believe the American people needed more money, and this Congress failed us. So what I really think is that these women woke up and said, it's the Republicans who are failing me. It's not just the president, it's those in Congress as well. But I can tell you right now, we will see a lot of people who voted for Trump that are Republican women vote for Biden this time around. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It's country over party.
Hilary, you follow the numbers closely. Do you have any idea how many Republican women are running for the House? And they got their nominations at a time when Trump was still popular. Now they may be running away from him.
Well, I think that the point that Congresswoman Norton raised before is the right point, which is that the map is expanding for House Democrats. And so, you know, look, but I'm somebody who is glad that there are a lot of Republican women running. I want to see more Republican women in elective office. So, you know, more power to them. I think what we have seen, though, overall in the campaign this year is really instructive. In 2016, nationally, there was an 11-point gender gap, which is, everybody here knows, is the difference between how many more women as a percentage voting for a certain candidate than men. So Hillary Clinton got an 11-point gender gap in 16, and that averaged out across the states. This year, we are seeing amazing numbers, and that points to Rina's issue, which is Republican women are crossing over. In Nevada, we have 18-point gender gap. In Iowa, there's a 19-point gender gap. Again, there's a 17-point gender gap. In Pennsylvania, it's 25 points. So women are going to change the election this year for all sorts of reasons. And I think the Democrats are going to be the significant beneficiaries of it. We've never seen gender gap numbers like we're seeing this year.
Your thoughts, Carrie?
Well, you know, we'll see. Again, I think that all these polls, we have to see who it is, because I also think there's a lot of Republican women out there. You know, it's interesting because I think that we talk a lot about this idea of all the Republicans who end up crossing over to vote for Biden. But in polls that I look at, you usually see when they shake out of what share of Republicans are voting for Trump. You know, it's usually close to around 90. And when you look, and 10% are going to Biden, or roughly. And then if you look at what share of self-proclaimed Democrats are going to Trump, it's usually about 1 in 10 too. So there's an awful lot of Democrats out there who have actually decided that Trump speaks for them, that they are tired of things like the kind of the turning away, or the quietness with which Democrats are just turn a blind eye to violence, and our state is calling for defunding the police and ignoring you know, the problems that people are having in cities where a lot of people are being affected. And that's one of the reasons why you have seen some polls that suggest that the president may do much better among minorities and in some urban populations. Again, I would just be cautious. You know, and one thing I think is an under considered possibility is this idea idea of who's talking to pollsters. If you are a Republican and you are used to being online and knowing that you need to, if you say anything that even hints at the idea that you might be a Trump supporter or a Republican, that you might lose your job or be socially shamed, which is certainly how it is in a lot of the social media world. Am I going to talk to a pollster? I've never had a pollster call and ask me about my vote. I don't know if I'd answer them. I don't know if there's a lot of women who decide I'm going to keep my mouth shut. So again, I think everyone is speaking with a lot of confidence about what we know from the polls, and maybe everybody on this panel will turn out to be right, and that Biden is going to win this in a walk, and that all these Republican women who voted for him in 2016, who we didn't know were going to be there, that they're going to vote for Biden this time. But maybe not. Maybe we are missing the big story, and it's just the media who refuses to acknowledge the existence of conservative women. It refuses to acknowledge the existence of Democratic women who support the president over Joe Biden.
Even Trump recognizes he is losing women. Why else would he be crying, suburban women, where are you? Vote for me. That's one of his
like
big now.
He also is probably being a little tongue-in-cheek.
He's saying housewives. He's saying housewives. He understands that it is women who are going to give this vote to Biden, and he's screaming out for them in ways that will not, in fact, attract them to vote for him, because he knows that they are much more than the margin of error, that they are leaving him in droves, and he cannot win, particularly if suburban women continue to climb out of those swing states that took him over last time.
There's one other point. I think Eleanor is right, but to the point that Carrie made about it's important to distinguish between voters and who we're voting for. So what we saw in 16, in fact, we saw it in 12 as well, but what we saw in 2016 was, Republicans have staunchly stayed with Donald Trump, including Republican women, and I don't think that's going to change this year either. I don't think there's going to be, despite a huge amount of Republican crossover in women for Trump. But increasingly over the last two cycles, women have identified less by party. They identify more as independents. And what we saw in 16 was that those independents and Republican-leaning women all broke for Trump. And I think that's the key difference here, is that we're not saying that Republican women are going to vote for Biden. I think what we're saying is that the huge amount of unidentified voters right now are breaking for Biden, and that the gender gap between men and women is significant. White women elected Donald Trump in many ways, and to my everlasting shame. Black women, have been consistently supporting Democrats. But
right.
I think
I wanted to get to that, Hilary, because Trump did win white women and white married women in 2016. But they say a lot of young people have already voted, 18 to 25 or 18 to 29 have already voted, and they're coming out for the first time, and they're voting in droves for Democrats. Is that accurate? Because, we heard it with Obama, both elections, and he didn't really move the needle, as they say, very much. He got like 1 or 2% more of young people who historically don't go to the polls out than had been out before.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing, is that younger white women are shifting to Biden, and that the seniors are still with Trump, and in most of the key battleground states. But what we also know is that if you can shift the numbers between 35 and under, and let's call 35 and under younger women now, because of the combined demographic, that can make the margin. And so I think that that's what we're going to end up seeing when you have these gender gap numbers they're coming from somewhere, and it is from younger women.
This was the part that I worried about between 2016 and 2018 is Republican women in my demographic being really turned off by the president's behavior. A lot of us are, moms and moms to young children. And every time the president is on the television, it's gotten to the point where I turn it off because he's just barking. He's angry. He's using words that I've heard him bleeped before. Language I would never expect an American president to use, whether they be a Republican or a Democrat. And this is a turnoff. So I do think a lot of them became unaffiliated and independent ahead of those midterms. And I think it will be so interesting to see who actually showed up at the polls, who actually voted this time. And yes, I think it will be American women who deliver this victory for Joe Biden if he is successful.
Whatever your position is, please get out there and vote before or on Tuesday, November 3rd. Voting is incredibly important in this election. Thank you all for joining me. That's it for this edition. Please visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And whether your thoughts are in agreement or to the contrary, please join us next time.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Frueauff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more. PBS.